Welcome to another interview here on the Herald's Horn. This week we are continuing Vorthos Month as I am joined by the one and only Jay Annelli. He is the Magic the Gathering Loremaster, a freelance writer who has written several different kind of omnibus style books covering Magic the Gathering, including Planes of the Multiverse, a really slick book that I picked up recently, and is the co-host of the long-running The Vorthos Cast podcast, which covers all things Magic the Gathering, story, and more. We talk about his work as Magic the Gathering Loremaster, what is a Loremaster anyway, and plenty more. Of course, I also have a bonus question with him that'll be over on the Patreon, but without any further ado, let's get into the episode. Hello, and welcome back to another interview here on the Herald's Horn. Today, I'm joined by the one and only Jay Annelli. I've already introduced him. Jay, welcome into the Herald's Horn. Thank you for joining me today.
It's good to be here.
So, Jay, I think the absolute bare minimum place that we have to start, which I think may frame this entire conversation, as the listener already knows, you are the or a Magic the Gathering Loremaster. I think it's the Magic the Gathering Loremaster, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. What does that mean? What is the Magic the Gathering Loremaster?
So it is a fancy term for continuity editor. I work as an editor on, I have worked as an editor on pretty much every piece of Magic fiction to come out since 2019. Maybe one or two things in 2018. I don't really recall the publication dates anymore. So for a good 7 or 8 years now. And what that means is I review for consistency with characterization, with existing lore and world building alongside like the greater Wizards team. I was originally hired on for this for the original War of the Spark novel because, like, as you had talked about with Carrie, I listened to Carrie's interview with you before this. They sort of switched from this web fiction format to a novel format, and it was like a completely new team, and they needed someone who knew about the lore to help try and keep things consistent.
That makes, I didn't know that it was a whole new team, but I think I maybe could have deduced that.
Yes, we can talk about that later too. I can sort of talk about the eras of those things.
Yeah, sure. So they brought you in for the book, and then you have continued doing that work for them ever since, huh?
Yeah, so that was with the franchise team, which was headed up by Jeremy Jarvis, who had been a longtime Magic AD.
He's been around for forever.
And he's no longer at the company. But then when the story went back to like the Studio X team, that is the R&D creative team, they brought me along with them because they were hiring new people like Roy Graham, who's the story lead. And they didn't have like, the full capability on board yet. And I guess everyone I've worked with liked me because they keep hiring me for things. So it's been going good.
Because you are not actually a quote unquote Wizards of the Coast employee. You're not hashtag WotC staff. It's just they keep saying like, hey, we like that Jay guy. Let's bring him back on for yet another project, freelance, right?
Yeah, I'm a freelancer. There's another freelance editor that works on the fiction. She's more of a copy editor that works on the fiction. And then obviously when you're working with like a franchise partner, they have their own editorial teams.
Definitely. So I have a really tough question for you, Jay, and that is how the heck do you manage to, do you have your own Magic the Gathering wiki that you yourself maintain that you just, or is it just all up in your head? I could not imagine keeping everything straight.
So
I guess a lot of research moment to moment kind of has to be involved too, right?
Yeah. So like there are a lot of gatekeepery folks that are like, how much can you remember at once? And I think that's stupid.
Yes, no, definitely.
So what I know how to do and what Carrie also knows how to do is I know where to find things. I know where to look. I have been around long enough that I've been through multiple like mothership jumps. And I have familiarized myself with everything enough that I know where to go looking. I do have my own sort of data sheet with like proper nouns and all that stuff that I can refer to, and that I keep updated actually for the Wizards team that has like tons of information. It doesn't include everything in Magic ever, but it does include everything after from Lorwyn forward, and then stuff from before as it matters. Like, so for the Phyrexian stuff, I went back and reread the original Weatherlight saga and incorporated as much of that as I could.
That's honestly super cool. I think it's like, it's kind of something we, not to reference the Carrie interview over and over again, but it's kind of something that we ended up talking about a little bit, is that Magic story is in so many ways so fragmented over kind of a variety of eras, a variety of, for lack of a better term, like creative regimes as well. But it is interesting to know that there is someone working specifically on, all right, actually, what was going on with the Phyrexians 20 years ago? What was the existing lore?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Bring forward, modernize, make sure that all the proper nouns are right, all that kind of stuff. It seems like fascinating work.
So, like, as we were getting ready for the, I think it was called the Marathon arc, which is the new Phyrexian invasion of the multiverse that culminated in March of the Machine, I wrote like a Phyrexian primer for the Wizards team for people who didn't have time to go back and read, 12 novels from the 90s.
Of questionable quality fiction.
Yeah. I think, they have full-time jobs in addition to, yeah. So, I wrote a primer with all like the key stuff, the characters and things like that. And part of that is how we were able to like, sort of, I think people have differing opinions on it, but the stuff like Dominaria United did a very good job of sort of seamlessly integrating with the old lore as well.
Yeah, I was honestly like the end, people can quibble about the pacing and how they handled some kind of things, but to me, it does kind of feel like Dominaria United was maybe the quote unquote peak of that arc when, yeah, like you said, very seamlessly integrated in stuff from the old stuff. Ooh, scary. Ajani is a Phyrexian now. All that kind of stuff was really cool, really hype for me.
Yeah, and I want to be clear that like, it's not like I'm the only person who's doing that or cares, right? Like I am just on the editorial side, the person who's helping with that, and helping like newer folks or people who aren't as familiar with it. But there are lots of people on the team who know a lot about it. And, they had their own Phyrexian language experts. I never want to learn that. I never want to have to learn Phyrexian. But you've also got people on like the design team, like Ethan Fleischer, he would crush me in old school Magic lore knowledge. But again, he has a full-time job being a Magic designer. So.
And he's been around for a while.
He's been around for a while now. Yeah.
He's been around for a while. Speaking of being around for a while, Jay, you have been around for a while as well. Obviously, I think it takes... to end up being hired as the Magic the Gathering Loremaster in the first place, I think you have to be recognized as a expert in the space. You've been kicking around the Vorthos community for a long time. How did you first get interested in Magic the Gathering lore, Magic the Gathering story?
So yeah, I've been at the very least writing articles about Magic for almost a decade now, and I've been involved in Magic Vorthos online spaces since like, I don't know, 2006, 2007-ish. So my parents, trying to get me out of Pokemon, bought me a like 7th edition or like, no, a 6th edition starter set back in the 90s. And so I actually played Magic with my friends whose parents were all trying to get them to like put Pokemon aside as we're going into high school.
So funny to like be like, all right, put aside Pokemon. Here's
Magic the Gathering. It's better than in their opinion, it was better than the cartoon creatures, right?
I mean, I guess, yeah, it's like more like traditional high fantasy theming versus
I was starting to get a lot bigger than the other kids at the Pokemon gym. Okay, like that's how it sort of.
Sure.
No, but in all seriousness, I played a little bit in high school, put it down. I had a graphic design job in college where the other designer was into Magic, and I ended up going to the Future Sight pre-release, which is a hell of a Magic set to come back into Magic on, because it was the most like complicated Magic set ever. But ended up loving it. Didn't read the Lorwyn stories when they came out, but when like Shards of Alara and like the soft reboot of the Mending came out, that's when I started actively reading Magic lore, and I eventually went back to the older stuff as well. But yeah, so that's how I got into it, and I largely got into it because Star Wars canceled like the novel line, so it was around that same time where like I had been
2014, 15, 16? I don't remember.
No, it was way earlier. It was like 2010-ish, 2009, 2000, somewhere in there. At the very least, like the novels had stopped coming out on a regular basis. I was looking for something else to occupy my time. So Magic ended up being it. All my friends were into it. We played kitchen table Magic every Friday night. Still managed to have girlfriends somehow. I don't know how that happened, but yeah, it was all good.
Right there with you. No, yeah, that totally makes a lot of sense. And then you went on to write articles about it, went on to start the Vorthos Cast. What's up with the Vorthos Cast? We can talk about that for a second.
So the Vorthos Cast was originally sort of a secret cabal of me, Carrie, and Lorelei, collaborating on projects together behind the scenes. So I started writing for Magic the Gathering Salvation in 2015 because Battle for Zendikar was coming out. And lots of folks were new to the story scene since the original Zendikar, and the original Zendikar story novel was not very good. And I didn't want to recommend people read it. So I would put together like primers as we started going into these revisits of planes. And eventually I was doing that for a while. And then my wife was like, "You're spending so much time on these. Why aren't you getting paid?" So then I went over to Cool Stuff Inc., where I wrote for a long time. I met Lorelei through Tumblr, I think, and Carrie through Twitter. Carrie had done this theory article in like 2014 that I absolutely loved. So I definitely always wanted to collaborate with them. And so, yeah, we chatted behind the scenes, talked through theory stuff, had each other like check our work, talked about a podcast for a long time, but I had a kid at the end of 2015. So I'm like, I don't have time for a podcast. I don't even have time for a nap. Okay? That's not happening right now. And then around 2018, my son was a little easier to manage for my wife for like an hour alone. So I was able to start sneaking out, and we did the Vorthos Cast. We started it actually with we did like 3 test episodes before we actually published a real one, just to sort of get our cadence down and our vibe. I'm not as on there as often as I used to be. In fact, I'm very rarely on there. I just have too much else going on. I have another kid. But I sort of do producer style things with them. I book our guests and things like that. And I collaborate on like what the topics should be and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's been really good. It's my favorite Discord community that I'm on. We have a Discord that's like $1 a month through Patreon. And that is I would make it free, but the $1 a month is very effective at keeping out people who want to who don't want to be there for good reasons.
It's a good troll filter.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
that definitely makes sense. It's nice, and it's nice to that you've been able to like cultivate a community of, I would assume, generally like-minded people who are interested in the story, interested in what you guys are doing. Therefore, that makes a nice space for yourself.
Yeah, I think it's a very nice, positive community. Not always positive about the story itself, but much more constructive than the internet as a whole. That's one of those things that's like whether or not I'm going to enjoy a community depends on whether or not their criticism is like constructive or useful in any way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that definitely makes a lot of sense. And now you guys have made like 1 billion episodes of the Vorthos Cast, right?
I think we're in like the 400s, maybe. I have no idea. I haven't been on one since like 2 months ago. So
yeah. Let's see. Final episode covering the stories at 335.
330. Okay, so not 400 yet.
That's still so many. Once you pass like 100, all numbers for podcasts are huge. That's so much to make of anything.
So the advantage of the Vorthos Cast, everyone's like, how do you manage? Because we have like 5 co-hosts.
Yeah,
like, how do you manage with 5 people?
Carrie,
Brian and Chris.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Brian and Chris were late additions, but now they're both within like the first year or two. But the advantage has just been that not all of us have to be there all the time. And when someone's in like a burnout phase, they can stay back. Or someone might have like specific topics or kinds of episodes they want to participate in. And so they're only there for that. And it ends up working out just fine.
Definitely. All right. Transitioning back to being the lore master of Magic the Gathering. Has any one set been more difficult than the rest?
Oh my god. So
I mean, it sounds like the Phyrexian arc was pretty tough.
that's a tough one. So I will tell you the 2 most difficult stories to work on were the original War of the Spark novel, because it had like 50 something characters that everyone was going to care about one of those characters. And I ended up making a giant spreadsheet for tracking where they appear and figuring out who disappeared from the story and who didn't, and like who was just a cameo, but even still making sure we kept track of everybody and didn't lose anybody, which was its own kind of challenge. The web fiction, the challenge is a little bit different because you have a lot of time. You can go back and fix things up until relatively right before when a set comes out. But the challenge is oftentimes things aren't in chronological order. Like sometimes we'll have this story will be on hold because our author isn't available for another month or so. This story is like a year down the line and design is changing some things. So we have to rework what was going to be in that ending there. And so the Dominaria united to March of the Machine arc with 4 different authors, basically writing one sequential story, one consecutive story, probably was one of the most challenging ones I worked on, because like just managing like, oh, have we edited this one since this changed in this story?
Yeah.
So that was definitely one of the toughest.
Cascading effects to always keep track of.
Yeah.
And I especially assume, like, I would assume that just with the way that Magic the Gathering is made, you know, if people who are listening don't know, you know, Magic the Gathering, a lot of work on Magic the Gathering sets, at least on the design side, I'm sure it can be a little different on the story side. A lot of times it's pretty far out. Things can change at the last second. Things are locked and can't change as much. Because things have to go to a printer because it's a physical product.
Yep.
And all that kind of stuff. But a lot of work is also done like non-sequentially. So I assume a lot of times the Magic story team can be working on. We'll talk about this more in the future this month, but I assume a lot of the stuff is kind of working. You're working on a lot of this stuff, like several cooks in the kitchen, non-sequentially. Mm-hmm. You could be working 3 sets from now while one set is being finalized. That kind of stuff. I assume that presents a continuity challenge.
Yeah. So what I'll say, I'll give some rough timelines. It varies a lot. And I can't go into a terrible amount of detail on this because, process-wise, that's an NDA kind of thing. But this is all, like, Magic fans need to realize how much of a gift Mark Rosewater is, because he pulls back the curtain on everything. Mm-hmm. So this is all stuff like Mark Rosewater.
He's the guy who, like, can pull back the curtain.
Yeah.
What are you supposed to do?
So if I slip and say something like, bye, Jay. If Mark slips and says something, he goes into Aaron's office and Aaron's like, please don't do that again. And that's the end of it, right? Like,
what are you going to do? Fire one of the most influential game designers in history?
So in general, Magic set timeline is about 2 years. About a year before a set release is when things like fiction, art, and creative text are all happening. Generally, the art waves and creative text are happening around the same time, about a year out. Story happens around that. Generally, at the very least, there's an outline before it goes to like art and stuff, so they know what like the big plot points are. But just to give you an idea, just in general. But then you have to remember that every 2 to 3 months, there's another Magic set somewhere else in the process. So that's where things start to get complicated because, you know, I might have the last few chapters of one story as I'm in the middle of another story and at the first few chapters of the story after that, and trying to make sure it all lines up. And again, I'm not the only person doing that, but it is always a challenge, especially keeping track of what's true between stories.
Yeah, that definitely makes a whole ton of sense. That just sounds brain melting to me personally. I'm glad that there's people out there who can do it.
So I come from a like emergency management background. And so just managing all these plates spinning at the same time has always just sort of been second nature. Sure. Yeah. And like, I used to like edit and comment on like 300-page disaster plans. So, you know, like doing it for a story about wizards throwing fireballs at each other is
a little different vibe.
Significantly less of a like mental load for me.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. No, red alert. There's a small detail error in the Dark Hero story. Woo, woo, woo. Jay taking a nap. That's awesome. Do you have a favorite Magic the Gathering character, Jay?
It's Duretti. He's my favorite living character. Duretti the Goblin. I'm pretty sure Duretti in his Aether Drift. I still have no idea how to say that. I'm pretty sure it's Aether Drift. In his Aether Drift story, was sort of a bone thrown my way by Miguel Lopez, who has moved on to the Destiny team. He's over at Bungie now. But yeah, it was great to see him actually appear in like a story alongside other characters that matter. So that was nice. But yeah, no, I love him. He just happened to be like one of the first precons I got after getting back into Magic, right around when my son was born. He combines two of my favorite things, artifacts and goblins. So I just love that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Definitely makes sense. And it was like, what, all of his third set that he had appeared in is the Commander, and then Conspiracy.
He was in Commander, Conspiracy Take the Crown, yeah, and then Aether Drift, and that's it.
Wow.
Yeah. And he only had one story in Conspiracy.
Man, he didn't even get us. That was. Yeah, I guess that was before like the web fiction covering Commander face Commanders era too. So he didn't even get something then. Come on, brutal. What is it about Duretti that appeals to you so much?
It's the goblins and artifacts. I love both of those things. So I'll also say this one's going to be a little more depressing. When I was like 19, which was a long time ago now, it was actually 20 years ago now. I was in a like really severe car accident. So I broke like every bone along the seatbelt line. I collapsed a lung. I broke my my hip. I have like a bolt in my hip. I got a plate in my thumb right here. So I identified with like the trauma goblin that had like that physical injury. And I've had a lot of concussions too. So like Duretti just kind of, I vibe with him a lot. I'm an Italian with a lot of trauma and concussions. So like
it adds up.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. I think that is one of the unique appeals about Magic the Gathering as a story property, is that there is an ever increasing number of recurring characters that people can get attachment to, whether it be through the story or a positive experience. Like I've been sitting around waiting for, when in March of the Machine, when Rashmi, however, I can't even pronounce it. Rashmi. Yeah. I can't even pronounce the name of my favorite character, right? She popped back up. I was like, whoa! Because I played her card in Commander a lot.
I sure hope we can see more of her. I like her character because she was like the first person to crack interplanar travel.
Yeah.
And now that the Omen Paths are around...
It's all her fault!
Yeah. Well, now that Omen Paths are around, sort of the conceit... I don't know if this made it to flavor text or not, but my headcanon for her is that she's like the person on Avishkar, like studying the Omen Path phenomenon. She's like leading the metaphysics team behind all that now. I think a little bit of that appears in Aether Drift. I don't remember.
Yeah. That makes sense. I haven't looked. I should look at that. I didn't look for... I looked. I was like, oh, we're going to Avishkar. I hope I get a Rush Me card. No.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I know. There's too much else going on there.
No, I know. So much going on in that set.
That is a perfect segue, though, to
yes,
people's expectations and the story, because I think Magic as a property is a hard one for some people to wrap their heads around because it is not a story-first property. So, like, a Star Wars is selling you a movie ticket. I mean, it's also selling you a lot of related merchandise. But the idea is that you go to the movie, you like the movie, then you will buy things from the movie. That's something a lot of people don't understand too, is how much like the franchise ecosystem involves all these products and things like that. But anyway, for Magic, Magic is a card game first. Story has to exist at a number of levels for folks. This is the one I always try and talk about when I have a chance. So you've got people who are only ever going to look at the card sets and only some of the cards that they happen to pull in packs. Just above that, you've got people who are like looking at the whole set. And they might piece some things together from story spotlights. They might see characters they like. And then beyond that, you sort of have like gradients of how enfranchised or how involved people are. And then at the top, and when I say at the top, I mean like at the like narrowest part of this
the
story
1%,
fan pyramid are the people who are actively like reading the story online, discussing it in online spaces, things like that. And so you have to sort of filter out story things to all these different levels and ways people encounter the story. There's sort of microcosms in there that are interesting. There are like people who just post summaries of stories in the Reddit comments, and like hundreds of people, that is what they read for the story.
See that and they're like, oh, cool. That is all I know about the story of Magic the Gathering.
Yeah, no, and that's all okay, right? Like I have a TikTok channel. I think I have almost like 10,000 followers now on my TikTok channel, which is just like 2-minute snippets of Magic lore that people peruse at their leisure. And that's okay if that's the like level of involvement you want to be at. I am very much anti-gatekeeping. But if you're going to talk about the story, you do need to understand how it needs to reach people like that, and how the art as a medium and the flavor text as a medium is different than the story as a medium. And it just gets very complicated, and people don't always seem to like understand that. Or they want Magic to be sort of a franchise that it isn't. They want it to be a fantasy story franchise with a card game attached, which is just not what it is.
No, definitely. Wait, quick update. I did a quick search. Thank you, Scryfall. It does seem as if I just ordered 5 of them too, because I'm that kind of guy. The Soul Ring from Aether Drift Commander features Rashmi saying, Nissa asked if the light of foreign suns could affect the flora of Avishkar through the Omen Paths. I built a device to capture such light for further testing. So it seems that, yes, your headcanon in one way or another has made it onto one piece of flavor text from Aether Drift.
So I was on the creative text team for Aether Drift. I just don't remember. I don't remember all that anymore. It's tough
or whatever. Yeah, exactly.
I worked on that a solid 2 years ago, and like, God, even it just being like 2 months ago feels like 2 years ago this year. So it's coming out 2 months ago.
It all moves so quick. But no, I think that is kind of one of the greatest struggles, I guess, when it comes to being a story fan or making the story. Obviously, that every single different fan is at a different level of engagement. And I imagine that makes it very tough. Like you said, that's part of what made your work on the Forsaken book so tough, is because there would be some guy who came out of the woodwork and be like, hey, that character that was only ever on flavor text in the Ravnikin set that you're now referencing again, that doesn't line up. He's my favorite.
So there were two of those novels. War of the Spark Ravnica was generally regarded as sort of mid. I think there were a lot of issues with that. I'm not going to get into here. My biggest issue with it is because the card set had so many story spotlights. There was not a lot of plot points left for the novel that were like unique or like made it like a expanded experience, I guess might be the best way to put it. Like all the surprises were in the card set. And as someone who read that book before the card set, my experience was very different from everyone else, especially because I was expecting Dak Faden to show up in the card set and then he dies in a Linkin Park trailer. Which, whatever. It is what it is. Forsaken had other issues where it has now led to there's regularly sensitivity consultants involved to make sure that when tackling certain issues, whether it be sexuality, other identities, anything along that spectrum, that there's someone there who is very familiar with it, very familiar with the pitfalls, and can review and give advice on things. And that's something they've been doing ever since. So despite how Forsaken came out, it ended up being a good thing for Magic story long term. I wish it didn't have to happen for us to get there, but it ended up, we wouldn't be where we are now if that hadn't happened.
To the point of even your from your TikTok, something I have always appreciated from you as a self-described, somewhat lapsed story fan up until extremely recently. I have always appreciated from time to time you have done very long threads on the like of, was Twitter, now Blue Sky, about hey, here's every legend that you're going to see in this set. What's up with them? What's up with them? Where are they from? How many of their cards have they seen before? What's a little factoid about them? That's always been a lot of fun for me.
This is a great segue because I literally wrote the book on Legends. So, I knew you wanted to get into my books eventually. So, back when it was still the franchise team, I ended up working with a man named Daniel Ketchum. I believe he's still at Wizards. So the franchise team is now just doing D&D stuff. I believe. Don't quote me on that. Things change a lot. No one bothers to tell me because, I'm a freelancer. Why would they bother? Hey, Jay, just so you know. No. So I was working with Daniel Ketchum, who is a very fun, at the time he was an art director to work with. He's previously worked at Marvel, I believe. They had a 3-book contract with Abrams Comic Arts to produce these sort of digest style art books for Magic. There was not a ton of graphic design budget associated with them. They were, like I said, digest size. They're not huge books. So there were a lot of sort of restrictions in how things went. And basically the concept for the 3 is the first one was Rise of the Gatewatch. I did not write that. They realized working on that one that it was going to be more work than they could handle.
Then they kind of wanted
inside,
to do internally,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I had been working with them for a couple years then, and someone had the idea. I was like, well, why don't we ask Jay if he wants to write? And I said, hell yes. Thank you.
Yeah. Would you like to write official Magic the Gathering books?
Sure. Yeah. So I've done 3 that are published so far.
It's the Visual Guide, Legends, and Planes of the Multiverse, right?
Yeah. So Legends, I believe, if I remember correctly, Legends was the first one where I basically curated the Legends. I looked at who the top commanders were. I looked at who were the most important characters to the background and world building of Planes. And then we Also cultivated the list for some diversity of like human diversity, but also diversity of like characters and creatures, so that it wasn't all human legends and dragons, right? So we found like a good mix there. And then I wrote like basically a giant version of one of my articles that was a bunch of synopses of who these characters were. We had space for like maybe a paragraph or two and one piece of art. I also curated the art. Like I have been involved with magic art long enough that I generally know how to find the pieces that I'm looking for. So for all of my books, I curate like 95% of it. And then the editors I'm working with at Wizards or the ADs I'm working with at Wizards, they might have like, oh, we actually were looking to go like this direction with whatever this art is. And so they'll put in things for that. But it's all writing these things is always like a partnership. So yeah, I did that. I did Planes of the Multiverse. And then there was a little bit of a gap, and they had a DK book coming out. So that was the visual guide, which is my masterpiece. I hope I get to update it at some point. But this was a very large DK encyclopedia, tons of artwork, tons of like world building space. And it's basically I wrote it as it is everything you could possibly want to know going into the Phyrexian arc, going into the March of the Machine arc, which is when it was coming out. Now, I hope I get to update it again.
Because incidentally now, it's just as things go, it came out in 2022-ish, then it's already quite outdated.
Yeah. We're going back to Lorwyn, and I have only the old Lorwyn world building inside it, so I would love to maybe update it at the end of the next arc, but I, as the author, don't make that call, right? That's a decision between DK and Wizards of the Coast. It depends on contracts that are going on at the time. Like there's sort of a complicated alchemy that goes into what products actually get released. And I'm fairly certain, I don't know. At the very least, it has been doing pretty well, I will say, because it is going to be translated into a 5th language later this year. So it is in English, Japanese, and the Japanese edition has its own cover, with one of the artists that does a lot of like magic sort of anime art for Wizards. Then it is in Spanish, French, and it's going to be in Italian later this year. So that's pretty fun. I'm translating into 5 languages.
You don't really get translations out of unless you're doing well.
Yeah. DK, I don't think they would have pushed it this far unless it was doing well. They don't always share sales numbers with me, so like DK, I couldn't tell you how well it's sold. I can tell you my local Barnes and Noble has gone through like 3 or 4 cycles of buying 3 copies of this book. So, at least 12 people in my greater metropolitan area have bought it.
Let's go. At one of several Barnes and Nobles, perhaps?
Yeah. So the writing process for these, generally, Wizards and whoever the publisher is has like an idea for what they want for it. It's kind of specific. So like I said, Legends, they knew they wanted Legends. They knew they wanted a book on planes. And I tried to accommodate them as best I could within like the limits, of like, we only have room for this much word count per page. We only have this many pages. We also want to fit in a lot of cool art, so let's figure it out together. The DK was I had much more freedom, because they said, well, you're the guy who knows how to do this. You've written 2 of these books before.
Why don't you do it?
Yeah, no, I mean, it wasn't exactly like that, but at that point, I was working with a guy named Paul Morrissey, who is at the franchise team. He's one of their editors. And Paul, I had been working with for years at that point on like the Boom comics, on the tail end of the last book. And he's like, you know what you're doing, Jay. Just put together an outline for us. Let me make sure that there's nothing that we're like, no, don't do that. Or, oh, you're forgetting this. And then just go to town. So I had a lot of freedom to do fun things in that book. And DK had a contract with a company called, I think it's Studio 43 or 34. It's Studio something number. That's like a design studio that they work with to do the actual graphic design for the book. And I worked with their graphic designer fairly closely. Like, there were some points where I did like literal sketches of how I wanted like the layout of the page to look and handed it over. They were a really great group to work with. And so that's how we got things like there's a Ikoria page has the 5 different monster clades, but set up as sort of like a nature book where it's like a big circle showing you how all the clades link together, and like with artwork of the fusions between them two, between each rung of the circle. That was a lot of fun to work on.
Yeah, that sounds like an awesome project. I assume that took you quite a while to do too.
So
I put it together in a month.
So timetables being what they were, I think I had like 3 months to do it. It was the DK. So the first 2 books were 20,000 words each. The DK book, and I had about 3 months to put that together. The DK book was 60,000 words, and I again had about 3 months to put it together. So I pumped out word count like you would not believe, in order to get that done. Cause like 3 months sounds like a lot of time, unless you remember that you want weekends, right? Like, it's
and then it's basically like 2 months.
Yeah, exactly. So,
and then you remember that you're still doing continuity editor work. And
so I had to budget my time effectively, in order to accomplish all that. I think. So, if you want to know something crazy, I was in the only Wizards promo I've been in was for Streets of New Capenna because I was their unofficial cultural expert on it, being a New York Italian. And the lead for the set, Jenna Helland, who is fantastic. She's basically the reason we have Magic Web Fiction like it is. Jenna had left the company, and I was one of the people who, like, no one else really had the time for this or knew the background of the Phyrexian stuff that well. So they sent me to California, and I filmed with Command Zone, the Jimmy and Josh. Yeah. I filmed, like, a world-building thing with them, and we did, like, a big world-building, like, the intro video in, like, a speakeasy. It was an Italian restaurant that, I forget what the name of it is. It's called like the Beetle Club or the Scarab Club or something like that in LA. That has this very old fashioned speakeasy look, and filmed like all the promo for that there. And I was there. I don't know how good I was. So while I was there filming, I was also doing creative text for, I think it might have been Ether Drift at the time, if that was like 2-3 years ago, because it was filmed not long before it came out. It was either Ether Drift or Brothers War, one of those two. I was writing this book, and so in fact, this getting sent there for a week really helped because no one in LA starts doing anything until like 10 or 11. And,
which is insane to me. Ugh.
And I am on East Coast time, so I'm waking up at like 5 a.m. And so I got a solid 4 hours of work done on this book every day I was there, and managed to hit all my deadlines and everything while doing these 3 other different giant projects. That was interesting.
Yeah, that definitely, that's where you realize, maybe I'm doing a little bit too much right now. Maybe one less thing.
Yeah. At the time it was okay because my daughter was still like a baby, so I could like write with her in my arms, but yeah.
60,000 words in 3 months is, I don't think people realize how many words that is.
The good news is, since like mid 2020, I have more or less been doing the freelance thing full time. So like, it's not like I had a 9 to 5 to come home to. I just had to parent children while I was also writing this.
So you had a 12 to 12. You had a 12 to 11:59 while also
Thankfully, my son was old enough that he just wanted to watch, like, you know, his cartoons or play video games or something. And my daughter was young enough that I could literally just
chill.
Put her down to nap, and I could get a couple hours of work in.
Yeah, that makes sense. So. That makes sense.
But that's enough about me. Let's talk about like more Magic Sphere stuff, right?
Sure.
I think I had mentioned earlier, I wanted to follow up on this because I had sort of said this in I was going to add this to like a TikTok video before, but there's like a few different kinds we have to be careful in getting into Magic in paying attention to comments in the online sphere, because there are like 3 different classes of people that I think outside of like the general, they're just gonna hate everything regardless, or they haven't actually read anything in 10 years, but they hate it anyway. There's like, you've got the old school Vorthos, who are obsessed with novels that came out 20 plus years ago and can still hold, or at least they're obsessed with their nostalgia for those novels. And they, everything has to be compared to like their nostalgia for those novels. And it's tough for web fiction to like do the same thing that like a full 100,000 word novel can do, right? The others are the people who think they know what they're talking about.
A dangerous class.
Which is frustrating, because like, I know what's a retcon and what isn't. I know what's a continuity error and what isn't. But looking online, I'm like, where did you
learn
people?
This?
I'm like, it's okay if you didn't like this. I want to be very clear. It's okay if you don't like any Magic story that comes out. That doesn't hurt my feelings. But like when people jump in with like, oh, this contradicts, and they'll just say something like completely incorrect. Like I reread that like last year and took notes, and I'm like, this isn't a contradiction at all. And there's the third class that I'm so confused by these people, because they've been around in the Magic community as long as I have, or almost as long as I have. And they have not liked anything that has come out in that time. And I am deeply confused why they're still reading. And I'm like, you can just not like things. That's fine. But I'm like, why are you so heavily invested in this franchise that you don't seem to like?
I think I've seen Magic the Gathering before described as about as close as we get to a lifestyle brand in the gaming world. A lifestyle brand in that you it can pretty much take up your whole life, more or less. It can represent your social circle. It can be your only major hobby. It can be what you do on your Monday, Wednesday, and Friday nights when you go out. And I think there are a lot of people that Magic the Gathering in its many different elements have been their lifestyle brand for 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 32 years. And, past a point, they kind of just don't know what to do. So if someone,
that's a really good
so
point,
if someone has been really into Magic the Gathering for, say, let's pick a potentially conservative 10 years, they got into it around what that would be dragons-ish around
Magic Origins. A lot of people got into Magic around Magic Origins.
Let's say someone's been into it since Magic Origins. Origins was, some of the very first really hard push into the online fiction era. There was some small retcons and around some of the planeswalkers and how their beginnings were. Origins, the set was quite literally about the origins of these characters, which are now so iconic to us. Very perceivable, very easy for someone to get into the story big around there. Really, really into it. That I think could be considered by many like origins through, or even like a Tarkir block through some perceived time could be called by many to be a golden age in Magic lore, by some. My rose tinted glasses, me.
We all have nostalgia,
right?
Nostalgia glasses of Urza.
Yes, exactly.
As I like calling them.
Yes, exactly. But if that is when they got into it, and, you know, maybe they picked up Forsaken, whichever of the two books came first. I don't remember.
I get that. Yeah, no. And Forsaken, you know, like with the Chandra Nissa stuff, like really turned a lot of people who had gotten into the story off. And, you know, the course correction afterwards helped a lot, had brought a lot of people back. But there are a lot of people who just aren't coming back.
And there's a lot of people who read the current direction and they aren't into the planeswalkers not being planeswalkers and the whole plane. A lot of people being able to plane traveling and.
Yeah, I think.
But if it's the only way, if it's one of the main ways that they've always engaged in their main hobby and they don't have other main hobbies,
all their online friends are these Magic folks. Yeah, exactly. No, I get that because Magic has gotten me through, like Magic Friends has gotten me through, like moving away with my wife to another state while we have a young child and no friends around and no time to make friends because we both have full-time jobs that often require us to work extra hours, and then we come home to a toddler, like. Yeah, no, I totally get that. And then COVID happened. What I'll say is I think our current online landscape, one of our biggest issues is the lack of media literacy, I think. And people just not being interested in media literacy. They want to be mad at something sometimes. Or, more charitably, I think a lot of people lack the tools to sort of effectively critique things. They think complaining on the internet and media criticism are the same things, and they're not. Like, you know, media criticism, you really have to take into account what the medium is. You have to take into account what the context is, who the audience is, how this was made, why this was made. And that doesn't mean you have to be generous to it because it's a piece of franchise fiction. But it does require a little more of a baseline knowledge of sort of the behind the scenes. So I'm glad I got to talk a little bit about, you know, how sometimes these stories are like, you know, we're putting together the plane while we're flying it, right? Like, and for the most part, it works out. Sometimes things don't quite work out. Sometimes things people don't like aren't simply a story decision, but are, you know, because, we were going to kill off this character, but then 4 sets down the line wants to use him, so now that has to get reworked. It just is an example. Or things like that the online perception of things is always interesting. So like Kellen is perceived as being this last story arc's main character, but he was only in like half of his first set. He was a supporting side character in 2 sets, and it was only in the last set that he was a major character. And you see this even more with like Loot. People have sort of assumed
he's Magic's that guy.
People have assumed he's Magic's new main character mascot, and they went insane for a year about this little guy who's supposed to be cute. They were offended that they were supposed to like him. Like, that is legitimately, like, that's all the complaint is. And I didn't even like Loot that much until all of this happened. I'm like, you know what? I like the little bastard. Like, this is my guy now. This is my guy now.
Yeah.
No.
Actually, this guy rocks.
But the perception of those these are just like easy current examples, but the perception of those kinds of things is always tough too, because people take that sort of perception as fact, whereas Loot has appeared as an actual character in 1 set, and then we're now the set after that, and he is this big in 1 piece of art. And, you know, all of a sudden, all these people are like, oh, I guess I was wrong about him being Magic's new main character.
Well, and I think it's kind of tough, too, because this is like one of the problems I think that Magic the Gathering has. This is such a big brand. I think a lot of that reactionary content that a lot of people had regarding to Loot was because, like, yes, Magic's story was like, yeah, he's a minor character, he's a cute little guy, he's important with Jason Vraska for these reasons, he has this very important context, he'll be around, he's a cute little guy, he's here. He is important in this context. He's kind of a side character. And then everyone went to MagicCon, and holy moly, was loot on every single piece of merch that you could buy at MagicCon, which then kind of incidentally blows up his importance like way more than it could have and should have been in the minds of a lot of people.
He was on a little bit of merchandise.
Everything, Jay. He was on everything.
No. Fibblethip is on everything. He continues to be Magic's mascot for these things. Every single time.
I'm being hyperbolic.
Okay, all right. You know you're getting me wound up here. No,
he had a deck box. He had a deck box.
He had like a deck box, and he had like a pin, and that was like it.
Exactly.
No, I get that. And there's sort of like, because people exist at all these different levels of Magic story, and because they're often getting this stuff from friends, there's like this big game of like, we call it Vorthos telephone going on that sort of transforms these things into much bigger deals than they would be, especially when it's filtered through the lens of people who don't have like that media literacy to describe things better, right? They're just like, oh, Loot, he's like Magic's new main character to their buddies, and their buddies like, oh, I guess he's like Magic's new main character. Yeah, like, and that's just, it just spins and keeps going for a while. Like
and two, it is kind of just like, oh, he's Magic's main character. And then you happen to be on Instagram and you see an ad, and the ad you happen to be shown is the one where they use the Loot key art. And then, you know, you're like, oh, that's Magic's new character. And then you go to MagicCon and you happen to see Loot on a big banner, and you see the Loot deck box, and you're like, oh man, they're really pushing Loot. When in reality, if you looked at the holistic picture,
you got your confirmation bias going for you, right?
Exactly.
Like if you're looking for it, you're going to find it.
Yep, exactly.
So what I will say overall as well, because I know we're getting close to the hour time here. I've gotten questions about like how I feel about like the current story arc structure. I know Carrie had opinions on it too. Roy will probably have opinions on it. He's sort of the architect behind it. Although I want to be clear, like, if y'all want to be mad at someone for Magic Story, it's not just Roy, all right? There's a tendency to think like the story lead person is the sole arbiter of, he's like the sole person making decisions about every story related thing in the brand. And that just isn't what happens. Wasn't with Roy. It wasn't with way back with Brady, Dummermuth back in the day. But people like a scapegoat. But I think the current story arc structure, where we have these year-long arcs leading into like a bigger overall arc, I think it's sort of a good way to split the difference between what Magic fans want out of a story. Because like if you ask people what they want out of a Magic story, it's like 50-50 whether they want a plain focused story, they want like a unique adventure, a unique self-contained adventure, and the other 50% want a world-hopping, overarching meta-narrative, right? And so the Gatewatch was a lot of one thing, and certain people didn't like that side of it. And then when we went back, when we had more self-contained stories, which Magic's gone through cycles of both over the years, people wanted overarching stories like, why am I paying attention to this? Nothing's happening, right? Like, it doesn't matter that there are 5, like, unique, self-contained, really awesome adventures. There's no connective tissue. Nothing's happening. So I think the current story arc does a really good job of sort of bridging the gap between those. You know, like, you can read a Bloomborough story and not have to be... Like, there's elements of, like, a bigger meta-narrative, but you don't have to be aware of all of that to enjoy the Bloomborough story.
To reference the Carrie interview again, like Carrie brought up, where we currently kind of started this arc is the Bloomborough story. And following their recommendation, I checked out the Magic Story podcast version of Bloomborough, because it's easy for me to listen to a podcast as opposed to sitting down and reading some fiction. And it was interesting. Like Carrie said, there are some outside elements. Like, yeah, Ral is here. He's looking for Jace. That's a little contextless if you don't know the big overarching stuff. But I'm 4 parts in, and it's kind of just a story about Bloomborough, which is nice.
Yeah, and some of them, like, the amount to which they do it varies. But, I mean, people constantly want blocks back. But I think people have forgotten how
People have forgotten how miserable blocks were, actually.
How miserable. And a lot of people, I think a lot of these people wanting blocks back weren't around for blocks. They don't remember, like, if you didn't like the world you were on, you're coming back to Magic next year.
Yeah, come back in 9 months. Sorry.
And yes, I would absolutely love for the story team to get the budget to do a novel-length feature for every single Magic set. I think we'd have to have some more fans show up for that to happen. But I think with the budget, like, you know, we've got maybe 10 to 12 episodes per set, or 10 to 12 story chapters per set. So something like a novella, like 50,000 to 60,000 words, somewhere in there, per set. I think it's been allocated pretty well. This is like, as a fan of working on this stuff, I am enjoying this a lot more than as a fan working on sort of the very disconnected stuff I worked on between War of the Spark and, say, Kaldheim when we started kicking into. It doesn't mean I didn't like those stories, but I am definitely a meta-narrative guy. So having that meta-narrative threading its way through things again makes me happy, but also having the ability to sort of focus on a plane-related story more often than not has been very nice as well.
And I do think that is kind of a lot of the sweet spots that, like, the side stories can help hit as well, because I feel like the main story of Tarkir Dragonstorm, for example, was, you know, it was quite Tarkir related in that it's a very Tarkir centric story, but a lot of the stakes are much higher meta level. A lot of the other things coming in are a lot higher meta level, especially by the time we get to 0.5. No spoilers, but, you know, by the time we get to the final part, we're kind of a bit beyond just Tarkir, right? And the implications are a bit beyond, oh, we got to stop these dragon storms, right? By the end. But we still got to get some really close looks of what was going on with Tarkir on the plane, all that kind of stuff. What's going on with Tarkir? Oh, read the 5 side stories about the 5 different clans. Very fun, very cool model. I'm number one side story enjoyer, Cal Jones. I think that's going to be the theme of this entire Herald's Horn Vorthos month. I think it's going to be Cal, number one side story enjoyer. More side stories, please.
So the other thing I'll say is now that we're several years into being back into the web fiction, I want to say I'm going to take partial credit. We have such a strong stable of writers now. You know, Cassandra Caw she killed the Tarkir stories. But we had, like, even all the side stories were done by Magic greats. You know, Shannon McGuire wrote one of the side stories. We had, we had Yi Chao come back, who was one of the creative team members during the Gatewatch era, and wrote some really great stories back then. Was able to come back and do a story here, and we had a lot of fun doing that kind of thing. So yeah, I think overall the prospects for the future are looking bright, regardless of how you feel about Universes Beyond, which, I'm gonna spoiler alert, Magic lore is not folding into Universes Beyond. It's not. Like, I still have a job and we're working out beyond the ziplining. So that should tell you that they're still focused on Magic lore being Magic lore.
Yeah, exactly.
But so regardless of how you feel about that or the set release schedule, I think Magic lore at least is in a pretty good spot right now.
Mm-hmm. No, definitely. And Jay, I think I would agree with you, and I can't wait to see where we continue going. But like you alluded to, we are running a little bit out of time, so I have 2 questions left for you. As always, I'm going to be picking your brain about your hobbies outside of Magic the Gathering, if you even have any, for the people over on the Patreon here in a minute. But before we close up, I want to ask, is there anything else you would like to leave the listeners with before we go?
Oh, that's a lot of pressure on me, Cal. Like anything else, I don't know. I've
anything
rambled
at
at all
all.
these people for an hour. You can find my if you want to find me somewhere, just look for Vorthos Jay, Vorthos Jay. I do very irregular articles for Cool Stuff Inc. I do Twitter threads on Blue Sky occasionally. And if you really want my content, TikTok is where it's at right now. On Vorthos Jay. If you want to help me hit that 10,000 mark, I'd appreciate it as well.
Yep. Jay, thank you so much for joining me here on the Herald's Horn.
Thank you.
Bye.